Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's 11:33, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I will toss the chair over to Rocky Schneider, our chair for the Planning Commission.
Well, almost good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here as we get kicked off this Fargo growth plan. I think it's a really exciting thing. As you know, Fargo hasn't had a growth plan update in the last 16 years, so we're really excited to have CZB and their other colleagues here with us and in Fargo to talk in person and go through where they're at and get some feedback from us as well. So hope everybody is very active in the participation and just gets involved.
Rocky, could we do an introduction around the table?
Absolutely. So I'm Rocky Schneider. I'm chair of the Planning Commission, and I'll go to my left here to start.
Hi, good morning. Denise Kolpak, Fargo City Commission.
I'm sitting next to somebody who just turned 60 today, so just don't want to tell a secret, but just want to say, Tim Mahoney, Mayor.
Nice guy.
Nicole Crutchfield, Planning Director.
I'm Mike Rethinger, City Administrator.
Dave Pepcorn, City Commission.
John Gunkelman, Planning Commission.
Dawn Morgan, Planning Commission.
Pete Lombardi from CZB.
Thomas Eddington, CZB.
Lauren Holm, CZB.
Matt Ingles, CZB.
Kim Satrowski, Fargo Planning.
Mark Williams, Fargo Planning.
Arlette Preston, Fargo City Commission.
John Strand, Fargo City Commission.
Tommy Schmidt, Planning Commission.
Thank you, and just maybe a technical update. So we do have these mobile mics in front of us when you want to talk. We know there's people watching online, so make sure it's green. And then because we have food, turn it back to red just so we don't get a lot of crunching sounds and everything else. But are we, there's a presentation. Is that being given by Peter?
Yep.
All right, we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Rocky. And thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning, noonish. And so what we'll do today, we'll provide a project update. We are kind of kicking off the public engagement component of this project this visit. We've been working, of course, since late winter or midwinter, really. We had our kickoff meeting with city commissioners, with planning commissioners back in March. So we'll be giving you an update on what we've been doing over the past few months, where we are now, where we're headed over the next few months. We'll show you some of the analysis we've been doing so far. It's still in progress, but we'll give you a sense of what we're finding, and we'll have some discussions around that. And then we'll talk about next steps and what to expect, especially through August for this project. So just a reminder that CZB is one of several firms that are working on this project. We have colleagues at Strategic Economics that are focused on fiscal impact analysis for growth in Fargo. They'll be completing their work within a few weeks, wrapping up their heavy-duty initial phase of analysis of how Fargo has been growing and how that informs the scenario modeling that we'll be doing during the second phase of this project. MRB Group is our engineering sub, and they're completing a capital facilities analysis. Right now, they've been talking with Public Works, Engineering, and other departments to get a handle on infrastructure and how that informs future growth. And then Code Studio is our partner on this project that will be helping us think about how to translate the plan that emerges by the end of this year into a smooth handoff to code updating processes that come following the growth plan's completion. So we're all very excited to be working on this project and very interested in what we've been finding so far and the conversations we've been having. So some quick project updates, just a kind of a quick run through of what will be in this new growth plan based on the approach that we're following. The goal is to deliver a growth plan that provides a decision-making framework for future development and redevelopment that identifies some values, planning principles, the overall vision that the community has for the future, and sort of how that should inform decision-making framework for what you can anticipate and what you can't anticipate in the years ahead. We'll be producing a growth plan that provides some guidance on what goes where at a high level, again, to inform the ultimate updating of a land development code after the growth plan is finished. And then really the core of the document will be a growth management plan that really outlines what are the implementation steps that the city should take to realize that vision for growth. And really a key piece of this is creating a growth plan that the city will find useful, whether it grows by 5%, 50% or 75% over the next 20 years, rather than creating something that is narrowly tailored to very specific growth projections. The idea is to create something that is adaptable and will provide guidance regardless of how much growth ultimately happens in the coming decades. The timeline you see right here on this slide kind of shows how we've parceled this out into 3 phases of work. We're kind of towards the tail end of the first phase, where we're really doing this background analysis to understand how Fargo has been growing and what path it appears to be on right now based on how it's been making decisions, how it's been deciding where and how growth happens in its recent past. And that will inform the second phase of work, which will be identifying exactly how Fargo wants to grow going forward, whether that's a small deviation from how it has been growing or a more significant deviation. That's what we're kind of beginning to figure out at this kind of where we are right now in this project. So Phase 2 will begin next month and extend through the end of the year, really. And that'll really inform this third phase, which is pulling everything together into this growth management plan that we intend to wrap up by the end of March 2024. The public engagement process, as I noted, is really kicking off this visit this week. We have been working with an advisory committee of stakeholders that we'll be meeting with this afternoon. They are tasked with arranging kitchen table conversations with neighbors, colleagues, peers, friends. We're giving them some material to work with, to work through with these groups that they assemble, to help give us a sense of how the community thinks about trade-offs and decision-making when it comes to growth. So that's a core task of that advisory committee. But this visit, we also have open houses. We have an online open house that kicked off yesterday, and there's a survey component to that that'll help give us a broader sense of how the public thinks about growth in Fargo. So the open houses, there was one last night at the Carlson Library in the south end of the city. We have one this evening at 5 o'clock in the Sky Commons on the second floor. And then, as I mentioned, there is an online open house that's now open through July 21st at fargogrowthplan.org, where folks can see basically the same material that's at these in-person open houses, and there's a little survey component that's added to that. And then, just one final piece of background here, because we know it's a question that comes up. How does this growth plan relate to all the other plans and analyses that Fargo currently has in its library? And really the short answer is that all of that has been done in the past decade or more, from the recently completed regional housing needs analysis, going back to the comprehensive plan adopted in 2012 and even the 2007 growth plan. All of these previous plans and documents are informing the work we're doing now. And going forward, the growth plan that emerges from this process will help to inform how the comprehensive plan gets implemented, how the transportation plan that's in a draft state right now, how that gets implemented. So it's both being informed by these other documents, and it will be informing these other documents and future processes, whether it's corridor plans, neighborhood plans. So everything is kind of linked and shouldn't be seen as this plan kind of replacing all of these other documents that the community has spent a lot of time working on and furnishing clear vision statements that are helping to inform this work. So before we go into a kind of an overview of what we've been learning and then a discussion after that, any questions about kind of where we are in this process or about the project in general? All right. Well, then we'll go into a few slides here that I'll turn it over to Thomas on our team to talk about what we've been looking at, and this is just sort of a slice of what we've been learning so far. Our friends at Strategic Economics, they're working right now on completing their fiscal impact work, and as I said, the engineers are finishing their capital facilities analysis. So the slides we're sharing today are kind of a high altitude overview of what we've been learning that has yet to incorporate a lot of this other analysis. But again, I think it provides a pretty good snapshot of kind of where we see Fargo going at this stage on its current path. Thomas?
Good. Thanks, Pete. So we've got a little bit of analysis to share with you guys, and so if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns as we walk through this, please feel free to interrupt. But it kind of is it's our intent to give you some of the initial land use mapping and some of the analysis relative to kind of demographics, acreage used, et cetera, with regard to the growth so far over the past, really looking at the past 40 years. So as you look at Fargo since 1980, pretty much you've seen a doubling of your population and you've seen really a doubling of your land use. So the area annexed into the community since 1980 has been about 15,000-ish acres. So you've almost doubled where you were. So going from 16,000 acres to about 30,000 acres. It's probably worth noting, and not on the slide, that in the ETJ, your extraterritorial jurisdiction, you have about another, give or take, almost 30,000 acres that you can expand into right now. That's based on the growth plan from 2007. So there's still a significant amount of land to grow into. But really, looking back at 1980 to now, again, doubling the population and doubling the land use, roughly. Here you can get an idea of the annexations that did take place on a decade-by-decade level. You can see that between 80 and 90 and 90 and 2000, you annex between 2,000 and 5,000 acres. You kind of hit a high between 2000 and 2010. It's worth noting that as we look at the annexations between 2000 and 2010, large areas, but that area set the framework for development between 2010 and 20. So land was annexed in the decade prior, and really we saw that kind of start to fill in from 2010 to 2020, and it's still filling in, actually. This map just gives you an indication of where the acreage is. You can start to see kind of that pattern growth outward for the annexation as you guys continue to address population growth, et cetera. So you can see that really the significant amount of land was, again, between 2000 and 2010. Large amounts of land in both the southwest and the north as well, probably for some utility, water services, sanitary service reasons. I think you had some issues to address annexation up in the north. Not as much for development yet, anyway, but maybe down the road.
Could I ask a question? You mentioned extraterritorial growth. Were you suggesting within that annexation would continue in those areas?
We suspect that based on your 2007 plan right now, you have identified some ETJ, extraterritorial jurisdiction, north and south. You're certainly a little bit landlocked to the west, West Fargo, et cetera. But yeah, there would be opportunities to continue annexation up in those areas and down.
Yeah, I understand the part about the north, but what about the diversion in the south?
So the diversion to the south touches a little bit of kind of that north loop, if you will, for the kind of the collection area, the retention area. That is within the ETJ, but most of the ETJ kind of butts right up against the diversion. So most of your ETJ is actually north of the diversion. A small section's not, but most of it is.
Okay, all right. I was interested in what you had said about the diversion the last time, and so one of the things I've kind of been looking into lately is limiting the growth of a city. I think it's been done in other places. Do you have any suggestions as to spots that might have been done in a purposeful way?
Where they've limited growth?
When they have done that?
Well,
yes.
I mean, I think that that's what we'll get into as we work with you all and the community. So we
Oh.
haven't defined that yet. But what I would say is, I think your 2007 plan, and I suspect components of this plan, will really talk about how you grow, kind of that tiered approach, that phased approach.
Yes.
And challenges with regard to leapfrogging, cost of infrastructure, et cetera. So if you're growing, there is some sense in annexing, certainly infilling your core. We're going to, of course, look at, that portion, supporting the core, but also how do we continue to infill this development in the annexed area, and then think about what is a logical progression for annexation.
Sure, yeah, I understand that, and, one of the things that I'm concerned about is quality, how to produce a quality city without it just leapfrogging and jumping here and there, and what it means to be able to do that, and look at planning so that Fargo is a unique city rather than just one where there are replications like suburbs in other cities.
Yeah, that is exactly where we intend to get input from the community, you all, the advisory committee, so that is the stage we're in. How do you want to grow, and what are maybe thresholds, what are kind of those allowances, if you will, to start to cross that line, the existing maybe annexation line. When is it okay to grow, and then how do you want to grow? Certainly, the planning department has considerations for a next step for the land development code, maybe in the next year, I think getting that underway. And certainly land development coding will help to define the regulatory requirements and kind of set that floor for development for certainly within the existing city boundaries, but that land development code would also be applied to your annexation areas. And so that does set your standards and the quality of development.
So just one other quick question. Have you worked with any other cities that have decided that they're going to set boundaries and not grow beyond a certain area, or are you familiar with others that have?
We have worked with some cities that have defined boundaries. Some are self-imposed, places like Boulder, Colorado, where Lauren's from. She could speak to that if you had detailed questions, but they set a boundary for their growth. Some communities have physical, geographical boundaries. It could be mountains, water bodies, streams, et cetera, where they're somewhat constrained by that. But most communities try to establish a growth area and then a logical progression to grow into that area rather than a hard line. If you actually look at this map and you think about the future, if you're looking 50, 60, beyond this growth plan, but 50, 60, 80 years out, your diversion is starting to create a type of boundary for
Yes.
growth in this area, certainly, right? Not just for you, but for West Fargo, for Horace, et cetera, right? So you've kind of got that component that'll play a role as well.
I know, I'm
we'll look at-
excited about that, and it just seems to me that endless growth, it doesn't make any sense because you lose your identity. So I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, that is something the planning department has tasked us with, so we'll get there.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions on that? We also wanted to look at what kind of development has occurred in the annexed area, specifically since 2000, kind of looking back 20 years. And so you can take a look at this slide, and you can see that a majority of the development that's taking place there is certainly related to residential growth. You can see that most of it is detached single-family residential. You have more of that, no surprise, no surprise in the annexation area, just due to the nature of suburban growth and suburban development. But you do have a significant amount of multifamily. Neither one, the multifamily doesn't keep pace with where it is in the remainder of Fargo, but there is still land to be developed in the annexation areas. And so we'll see how that plays out based on some of your maybe existing entitlements, and then certainly some of the planning work that we do for how to grow into those areas that are yet unentitled. You can see that there is a relatively small amount attached single family. So when it comes to things like townhouses and duplexes, not much in the city and certainly not much in the annexation area yet, but we'll keep following that. There's some subsequent data that we'll be providing to you also. You can kind of see where this growth is, where this development has taken place in the area. So you can start to get a sense of the pattern from a visual perspective. But again, not surprisingly, mostly detached single family.
Thomas, can I
Yeah.
ask one question? Just on your definitions there, so your detached single family versus attached, that's really sort of like the detached is your stereotypical one unit house type thing.
That's right.
And your attached is your townhomes or row houses or all the such like that.
Townhomes, row houses, and duplexes, yeah, things like that. And then when you get to multifamily, you're starting to get to stack development.
Interesting.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Here you can start to see that there, again, with the amount of single-family residential development out there, you do have about 17,000 of the 17,000 in terms of population of the community. It's about 15% of the community. You can see that there's about 19% of Fargo's land is out in that area, but 15% of the population. So again, a little bit less dense. In fairness to the annexation area, it's not yet done. There's still areas to be developed there. So I suspect you'll see that population increase, and it could end up being on par with the remainder of Fargo. While we did note that in the prior slide that single-family development is taking place out there, and there's often issues and concerns and, oh, is it eating up too much land, et cetera. The one thing that the community has done well, based on our early analysis, is, relatively small lot development out there. So even though it is single family, it's relatively small lot. So it's, so far the pace of development has been pretty good. It's not as if you're developing acre lots or 1.5 acre lots out there. It's not that. You guys have relatively tight single-family lots. So again, we'll keep following that through and mining that data a little bit deeper. But it's been kind of development as expected, maybe even a little bit tighter than expected for the single family. But you can see that persons per developed acres, it is at 4.9. There's been a gradual decline over the past 50 or so years in the community, where you are at about 6.3 per acre in the community. It's about 4.9 in the annexed area, so a little bit less density. That pattern's been pretty continual. Here's where it probably deviates a little bit more than you would probably like to see. So while it's 15% of the population is out in the annexed area, and 19%, call it 20-ish, a fifth of your land is in the annexed area, only 5% of your total jobs, your employment, is based out in that area. So most of this development has tended to be, again, residential. And if there is retail or commercial or office, and there is certainly, it's a relatively low percentage of the overall percentage for the community at large. So as we continue to look at this will have implications in terms of commuting patterns, congestion on the roads, the highways, but also it'll have implications in terms of how the community, how the residents in that area actually, how they interact with commercial development, how they interact with cafes and coffee shops and grocery stores. Do they have a walkable opportunity to get to some of these? And probably the answer is right now there's not much employment out there. There's not as much commercial development, so they don't have as much walkability options as well. It's something that we've heard from some of the other entities that we've met with in our time during our last visit and even yesterday, and so that is something that we'll want to look at as well. That lack of employment, that lack of commercial development is actually probably inhibiting walkability and increasing commuting patterns, probably something you guys have anecdotally or intuitively noticed. We did want to look at we did take a look at the residential builds. We wanted to see what percent took place in the area annexed since 2000. No surprise, 61% took place in the annexed area. We did kind of want to do a comparison to the core neighborhoods, the foundation of the community, and so about 3.6% of new builds took place in the core neighborhood area. So that's kind of infill development, et cetera. But then, in fairness, we wanted to look at remodels, right? Because certainly the core neighborhoods are relatively built out compared to the annexed area. And so about 23% of the residential remodels at 100K plus, we looked at significant remodels, took place in the core neighborhoods. So there is, you are starting to see some commitment toward reinvestment in the core neighborhoods. So the entire city of Fargo is at about 32,000 acres. About 25,000 of those acres are developable. So the other 7,000-ish acres are rights-of-way, et cetera, non-developable land. That's pretty typical in the community. About 20% of a community is rights-of-way, et cetera. So as we looked at the 25,000 acres in the entire community, this is existing before 2000, all of the annexation areas, everything. About 74% of the community's been developed at this point, or set aside for parks or conservation. And so about 26% is undeveloped. That's opportunity for infill, that's opportunity for redevelopment, et cetera. As you look at this acreage, again, it's about 7,000-ish acres that could be developed in the community as a whole. It is about 44% of those acres are in the southwest, the south, and actually a little bit in the north. That's your areas annexed since 2000. And the other 4,000 acres are just scattered throughout the rest of the city. So you've got about 7,000 acres to go. Some of that land, it may be vacant, it may be undeveloped, it may not be as desirable. We haven't, honed in on the exact, we know exactly where the properties are, but, what they're zoned, et cetera, we really have to dig a little bit deeper into that. But you've got about 7,000 acres to go. We kind of discussed this one a little bit early on. You can see the development patterns since the beginning of the community, 1800 to 1900, where you had about 47 persons per developed acre. By the time you get down to the 2000 to 2020, the annexations we talked about, again, you're at about 4.9 persons per acre. So you can see there's been a gradual decline, a little bump in 1950 to 1975, not sure what that was. I'm sorry, between 75 and 2000, you got a little bit more dense, but generally there's been a trend to lower densities per acre.
Can I ask you about your opinions on density? Because it seems like it's been an issue that's come up again and again and again, is being something encouraged.
Typically, I think that when you have limited land use, or you're looking, if you have limited land use, you want to make sure that you keep your densities a little bit higher. You want to be efficient in how you use that land. If you're looking at redevelopment options within the community, I think you are, if you're looking at, your 2012 comprehensive plan noted catalyst zones or catalyst areas, right? I think if you're looking at those kinds of areas, maybe those are mixed-use centers in neighborhoods, maybe they're defunct strip malls that need a facelift, that need a redevelopment. Maybe they need to become something more, a mixed-use kind of development. If you're looking at things like that, you want to get your densities up because you want to make sure that you create a walkable area, and you also want to make sure that if you want to actually provide quality transit service, whether that's bus or other kind of multi-modes, it could be great trails, et cetera, to get in there, you need to be up near about 25 units per acre plus. Again, those are for those kind of catalyst zones that you guys identified in your comprehensive plan. You can be 25 to 40 units per acre in those areas. You want to create energy. You want to create rooftops for the commercial, the mixed-use commercial that might be below or nearby. So those areas, I think density is good. I'm going to guess in your existing neighborhoods, you have certain neighborhoods where you want to preserve the character that is there. Keep those single family, keep that character, whether it's historic or simply the basic fabric is single family. But as you look at kind of those catalytic zones, pursuant to your comprehensive plan, I think you want to see those with more density. Again, your density in the annexed areas is not as low as we thought it might be. You're keeping some of the single-family development pretty tight down there.
Yeah, I just remember someone saying one time that, the core neighborhoods, because of their density, have been a greater tax base than some of the construction that's outside of, or more contemporary, I guess you would say. and that tax base has continued to pay off year after year after year, and that density has been really good for the city.
Yeah, density is generally good. Smaller lot development typically, assuming the house has the structure, the improvement has a decent value, you will get more per square foot as a result of smaller lots. So core neighborhoods, smaller lots typically should give you a better tax base. Any questions on that?
Thomas, just one question. Have you guys also looked at that last table with number of housing units as well, the same comparison? Because obviously one of the demographic trends that we're dealing with is, less people per unit, right? And so density kind of goes, you have to look at both sides, right? Where you talk about people per acre, but then also number of units per acre, because if there's just less people in a house, how does that impact?
That's right. That is our next step to look at that. So we've got kind of the population analysis per acre. What we want to do is start to look at population per acre, look at the number of units, dwelling units per acre, and then look at the household size in the different census tracts. So we suspect that you might see larger households in some of the annexed areas because it might be a family with 1 or 2 children, right? Now, what that looks like today as they move into those housing units it might show actually a little bit more density, or it may show a little bit more density, at least on that population. The number of dwelling units per acre might decrease. But we also want to think about 20 years from now. If a family's moving into those units and it's 2 parents and just say 2 children, in 20 years, that density, that population per acre is actually going to decrease as they leave that house, right? But the number of dwelling units obviously will stay the same. So we want to look at households, we want to look at dwelling units, and then of course we've got the population. We'll look at all of that. And then, again, look at it now and imagine where it is in 20 years.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Just thinking about my own family.
Right.
My dad's household growing up in Fargo had twice the number of people in the same size house that we have, and so it's just interesting data to.
Yeah, your average household size is decreasing, that's right, yeah.
Yeah,
Nationally,
I just wanted to mention too that we had a case that came up before the Planning Commission where there were objections to immigrant family that was more than 1 generation. And what they wanted to do was buy a duplex and have half the family live in one side and the other. And some of those are very traditional types of families, but we don't accommodate them very well, without overcrowding. So I'm just wondering if the kind of population growth or the description of families has been impacting your analysis of growth and what should be expected in the future.
Well, we'll look at that. I will say this, we're looking at actually households, so it's not necessarily a traditional family per se. We're looking at households. So if, the number of units in a household is defined beyond just a family per se. So we'll be looking at families, so we'll look at the total number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good, because I do think that's really a changing phenomenon. And for a while, they were saying, the most of the households were 1 person, and that the singular person is kind of a trending thing in the United States. But there's also that flip side of new kinds of families. Even like the Native American families always lived in larger extended families too. And so, to restrict that because of planning isn't a very good idea either.
Right, you really want to look at different types of housing opportunities for different types of households, i.e. a single family, a person that might be aging, maybe they've lost their partner, versus, a new family that may be greater than just the nuclear family. So, yeah, we will take all of that into account. Again, we'll look at households, not just family.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say that you also have, in addition to maybe immigrant households that have, non-traditional family styles compared to sort of the, nuclear mid-20th century kind of American definition, you just have, you have more multi-generational households in general right now. You have more 20-somethings living with their parents longer than maybe 20 or 30 years ago. You have, with the aging of the baby boom population, a lot of them are now living with their parents to take care of them, or their parents have moved in with them. So there's a lot of a lot of dynamism right now in terms of who's living with whom. And it does require a little more flexibility in terms of defining households.
Yeah, and I think Rocky brought this up at the last planning meeting, that, that density issue also plays into numbers of buildings on properties. Like, for instance, there has been a restriction on a secondary building if it's unattached. And in the past, there was such thing as the mother-in-law house or another house where someone from the family could live. And I'm hoping that that's one of the things that's changing in the city of Fargo, so that can be not only contribute to the density that we are wishing for, but also to accommodate different kinds of lifestyles.
Yep. Yeah, we're looking especially the land development code update process. I'm sure we'll be dealing with, thinking about that, whether it's accessory dwelling units, kind of that whole range of different housing types. What we'll do, sort of switching over from looking at data, we'll kind of spend a few slides now looking at some additional things we've been learning just by looking at what you have right now from a planning standpoint, which has been helpful for us to really dig into, what priorities were set in Fargo with the previous, or with the current comprehensive plan, with the current growth plan from 2007. I think our overall impression is that a lot of the documents you have right now that you've adopted, that you are using as guiding tools, they're pretty, for when they were adopted, they were pretty, state-of-the-art, forward-thinking, best practice-oriented documents. So this slide right here shows the kind of the top 5 priority initiatives from the Go 2030 plan. There was like a list of, I think, close to 40 or so initiatives that were ranked during the planning process, and these are the 5 that were the highest ranked. So permanent flood protection was number 1. Obviously, that's something that you can sort of put a check there in terms of something that the community has made major strides on. Promoting infill was the second priority. And just to sort of highlight the 3 of the 5 that really do have a bearing on how and where Fargo grows, that's pretty significant, that those 3 items there, the permanent flood protection influencing kind of where investment feels safe going forward, promoting infill, the idea of core neighborhood, downtown reinvestment, pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, not just sidewalks and bike trails, but thinking about how that infrastructure relates to land uses to promote, multimodal transportation. Those are 3, pretty forward-thinking priorities to have identified back in 2012. And then the public art and design standard items also on that list really have an influence on how your new development, how your reinvestment looks once it's in place. So a lot of thought and energy went into identifying where and how Fargo should grow during the current comprehensive plan process when that was done 10 years ago. And then the plan also identifies these catalysts. Thomas referred to these a few minutes ago. It calls out walkable mixed-use centers as one way of implementing infill promotion, a more pedestrian and bicycle-friendly environment, active living streets that feel like safe places and useful places for people to use to walk and bike. Energy efficiency was called out as another catalyst for helping to implement priority initiatives. We've noted these as really core pieces of Fargo's vision for the future within the past decade. And they echo to a large extent what's in your 2007 growth plan. That called for prioritizing livability and quality of life through a series of steps to take as Fargo grows. It cited walkability as a key issue to work towards, healthy and cohesive neighborhoods as core units to work with in terms of understanding land use and connectivity. It uses the phrase smart growth and sort of calls for the use of smart growth principles to keep the city as compact as possible. That's back in 2007. It also cites energy efficiency as critical for limiting sprawl, limiting unnecessary development, taking different modes of transportation into consideration, and again, design standards, thinking about the quality of public spaces, the kind of what things look like, called out as being important. And then I'd say the downtown and neighborhood plans that have come more recently kind of echo a lot of the language in the 2012 comp plan and the 2007 growth plan. So just our review of these existing documents suggests that there is a pretty coherent vision. There has been a coherent vision in place for growth in Fargo going forward. And so we think that some key questions for this process here is really, to what extent does that language from 2012, from 2007, to what extent does that remain a good fit for the community's vision for future growth? To what extent should this growth plan basically just sort of kind of adopt a lot of that language and kind of project it forward? And what does that mean to project that language forward? And in particular, I think an important side question is what balance should be struck in the growth plan between directing growth inward versus ensuring that new development on the edges, meets Fargo's standards for what new development should look like. So we see these as two really important questions for this process to grapple with over the next few months.
I'd like to ask Nicole a question, if you don't mind. I've been a proponent of infill and historic overlays. And so the ideas that have come up in regard to that is that most contractors don't want to work on a single lot for infill, with the standards that exist within that particular community because of the expense. And so we all know that the developers over the years have wanted to build homes that are replications of the one right next to it or something very similar in these tracts of neighborhoods that have been developed. I've lived in several of them myself as Fargo has grown north in particular, which was where I lived. But, to try to get a contractor to build something wonderful in an infill core neighborhood is really difficult. And I was just wondering if there have ever been a consideration of any kind of incentives for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think a little bit in terms of, I'm thinking of the Roosevelt TIF plan that was incorporated with the Newman Center. There's a line item in there for kind of more of a scattered site TIF approach. We're kind of on the cusp of trying to figure out how to implement that. We haven't, I see, Harold and Martha are here. We're, haven't really gotten into the details yet. We got to get the growth plan kind of figured out. My position has been we got to get the growth plan figured out on our land use plan before we start embracing incentives, if you will, in the single family housing market, at least in my position off the cuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd love to see it, so I'm hoping that there's some impetus behind it.
Nicole, I don't know if you mind if I add, because I know in addition to my role here, I'm president of the Cass Clay Community Land Trust, and it's one of the things we've talked a lot about too, is how do you do infill residential development? And what we found is in certain neighborhoods, and John, if you don't mind, I'll call out your neighborhood in Clare Barton area. There's been a lot of beautiful homes that have infilled because there's the market for it, the value's there. What we found on the affordable housing side of the land trust is there's other neighborhoods in town that there's just not the value to come in and do it. And so I know we've been really appreciative of the city because you do, maybe don't have incentives, but you do have funding that has helped make those projects a reality through, different federal pass-through fundings and other things. And so they've been done. And I think another thing Fargo's done really well is the inspections process and the dangerous buildings to really create those situations that allow contractors to come in and get the value back for those homes. And so what I'd like to better understand is how do we create the property tax base in those neighborhoods that are at risk so that there is a market to be able to come in and do that, like there is in the Clare Barton neighborhood or the Hawthorne neighborhood. Those neighborhoods, I think that's something that I would like to figure out with the land development code so that would feed into an incentive, because there's some areas of town in the core neighborhoods that do that very well and other areas that are tough because the value is just not there. In Jefferson neighborhood, yeah.
Yeah, I just comparing the different neighborhoods and the marketability, I know that in my particular neighborhood, which is Jefferson, that the sales of houses is like, the typical amount is 7 days. And that's kind of unusual in the sense that you'd think that it would be more, because Jefferson is sometimes compared to Madison, although they are very different neighborhoods. I would think Madison may be the most difficult, but I think that there's really a strong support of the possibilities of infill in those places and upgrading the buildings, as you said, by inspections and getting some infill in those places. We need to take care of the whole city and not ignore any certain neighborhoods as being marketable.
Yeah, I think these questions about how do you, if promoting infill remains a really important, priority for the city, how do you promote infill where the market isn't naturally going to operate, which I think is, where you have a lot of less expensive parcels. How do you make those good reinvestment targets? I think that'll be a key piece of this work. We just distributed some index cards, and what we'd like to do is kind of jumping off from these questions that we identify on this slide. We want to ask all of you a question that we posed to our technical advisory committee yesterday. That's a committee of department heads and different agency partners of the city of Fargo. And we asked them the same question to get a sense of the extent to which they feel and you feel that Fargo has done a good job, modest job, or poor job of advancing those smart growth goals that were identified in the 2007 growth plan and the 2012 comprehensive plan. Just so we can, at this stage of the process, understand, with about a decade or more under Fargo's belt of trying to apply those goals, how do you think it's going? How well do you think that the city, the community in general, has been at actually advancing those goals? So we'd like to, just give you a minute, think about that, and then, we'd like to sort of discuss what grade you'd give.
I think that's a mixed question because Shotwell's came in and that used to be a nice place in a neighborhood, and they built a bunch of condos in that area. Initially, we thought lower price, turned out to be higher priced than we thought. Tried to take that model and put it up in our other neighborhoods, and to Rocky's point, it just didn't work in other neighborhoods. Then you'd go into the Roosevelt neighborhood and say, hey, you buy 3 houses and take it all down and put apartments in there. Isn't that a great way? It increases density, and that's great. Neighborhood didn't like that because it wasn't single-family homes. So I think in smart growth, we've done fairly well, but we're a little confused because we're told infill, infill, infill. But when you plop that into a neighborhood, the neighbor says, oh, that's not the infill we want to see. So I think what we're hoping with the growth plan is we can help define that a bit. But almost in talking to Cole, we have to have some kind of incentives to make that happen because the builder won't come in because it can't make the money or can't get the value out of that home. So it's really been because initially the commission, and Dave can say this too, is that we initially were pushing all sorts of what kind of increased density can you get in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was saying, no, we don't want that much density. And so I think this is part of what we're hoping comes out of this study is how we can, what is the right growth to put in those neighborhoods? So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say, part of that has to do with design standards. So what you want, if you're doing infill, is something that looks like it's going to fit in the neighborhood, but it could be higher density than what was there previously. So I think that's really important to the residents, and everybody knows their neighborhood is going to change no matter what their opinion is, but there are some concessions that can be made, and that's one of the reasons that I like design standards.
Yeah, I think that the points you're making here that not all infill is created equal and can't be just, oh, well, if it meets a certain density, then, yes. It does, it's not, it's sort of a universal yes. There are some conditions that need to be sort of applied, and that'll be part of this process, thinking about what really constitutes what fits, the yes button for Fargo. Because, yeah, I think it depends on the street, depends on the block, depends on the neighborhood. All of those things are factors. Does anyone want to share any kind of additional thoughts on this? Yeah.
I think we're mixing up two terms, though. Infill is putting something in a lot that hasn't been occupied before. Reinvestment would be trying to keep people in houses and having programs that will be able to keep those houses such that we get properties in the land trust from one of our infamous Fargo landlords that we've purchased that I'd really like to have people see sometimes, that people are actually living in some of these places. There's a big difference. You talked about a portion of our land not being developed. That's one thing, but trying to keep going back into these neighborhoods. I've lived in the same house since 1976, and my house was built in 1938. And right on my two corners, right across, and Nicole's across the street, we had two teardowns, and they built houses on it. People wanted to be in that neighborhood. But the price point of those houses, those people could afford to put up something that was substantial. And I think there's a big difference. I mean, our gap, this is where the housing study that was completed was the need for affordable housing. And that brings up a whole nother gamut of your design standards, your everything else to make them affordable. And they have to be saleable. They have to be appraised by banks so that these people can get mortgages, or like with our land trust, we help a lot of times with essentially what would be a down payment. But I mean, I think we need to differentiate between, Don, when you're talking about we've torn down places to put up new stuff, that's one thing. We're just replacing what was there with something else. I mean, I thought it was very interesting that we had a project come before us at the Planning Commission on 8th Street and 5th Avenue, which sort of mirrored what was done over on 4th Street, and the neighborhood was in an uproar about what was done on 4th Street, and yet everybody was applauding what was going to happen on putting in a fourplex on 8th Street and 5th Avenue. So it's one day it's good, one day it's not good, and it just depends on who's commenting on and what the neighborhood wants. And essentially, that's in the same neighborhood. So it's,
Yeah, that's true, but everything doesn't need to be affordable housing either. If somebody wants to build an expensive house in a neighborhood that they think is advantageous, they should go forward.
no, I mean, but they're going to. I'm saying that those are the people that are going to do that. You're going to start seeing, I know of a couple spots over on 8th Street where two lots could be very well, two houses could be torn down to put up a nice big house because the people wanted to live on 8th Street, for instance. But I mean, but there's a difference between what we've been talking about in infill, trying to fill in the spots that don't have anything on them now.
Yeah, I think it's also called infill, isn't it? If a house is torn down and something new is built.
That's reinvestment, I think.
What do you
I don't know
say?
how you guys look at that, but
Well, I think what you're hitting on here is something we heard loud and clear yesterday, which is that clearly defining terms is going to
Yes.
be really important for this plan, because there's been a lot of, I think there was some, squishiness was a term that came up yesterday to describe some of that smart growth language from 2012 and 2007, that it's very easy to say that something is walkable, is dense enough. It's been very easy to sort of co-opt some of that language and imply that it's, meets the community's vision when it's not clear that it necessarily does, for the city, for a particular neighborhood, for a block. So I think a key goal of this plan will be to, make sure that we're defining things in a way that fit the way Fargo wants to define them. Whether it's, what is infill, what is a, what's a tear down rebuild? How does that fit into the hierarchy? What are the conditions and considerations that go? So I think definitions will be really important.
Peter, to your question on the screen here, I think one of the things, if you're asking what has the city of Fargo done for advancing, I think one of the best things they've done obviously is, bring you guys here, right? The city leadership has committed to updating these plans. And I think you can say that the core neighborhood plan or the downtown in focus plan, I think retaining quality staff has been a high priority. And I think that's some of the best things the city can do as far as, having that good thought leadership that goes into all this, because that's where it needs to start to develop these plans. Because I'd say that where we've maybe, individual processes probably rate differently on here. One of the things where we rate really low as a planning commission is when someone has to come in with a growth plan amendment. And then we have to look at a 2007 plan and say, does it make sense or not? I mean, we all know how silly that is, looking at a plan 16 years ago and trying to make a, legal administrative decision based off that, because it is just out of date. And so I think updating this is one of the best things we've done to sort of try to put policies in place so we can actually meet these initiatives, I guess.
So there's also a question. One time, when the head of the planning department years ago, I was talking to her about affordable housing, and she said, affordable housing is what you can afford, and what does that mean? And so, recently, one of the wealthy people that had a lake place on Middle Cormorant bought another place for 11 million about last week on a different lake. And for that was affordable for him. So, so what is affordable housing? Are you going according to standards of poverty levels? Are you going by standards of what social services are paying for individual apartments? Someone who works for us, Spirit Room, recently told me that the social services had raised her apartment stipend to $900 a month, that it had gone up. So that would fall in the social services of being affordable housing. So you have something to say.
I do. So this is a good plug for next week. We are going to be having all the Planning Commission and the City Commission are invited for a presentation on the results of the housing study. And all the jurisdictions, Planning Commission and City Commission, are invited. So if the invite came from my email, so hopefully you all saw that. And I'm not going to recite the day and time because I'll get it wrong. And then this is a good plug for the Chamber's brown bag, or not, Eggs and Issues event. Maybe Rocky knows that date off the top of his head.
It's the morning of July 10th, I believe.
Yeah, so that's also going to be focused on housing specific. The housing, one of the reasons, again, we did the housing study to begin with before doing this is to try to understand metro-wide what was happening and how that inputs information, labels, definitions are all critically important. Tomorrow, the housing regional director, or the HUD regional director for Region 8 is here, meeting with Commissioner Strand and Mayor and myself, just as a visit as they come through town. But their definition, as an example, HUD defines affordability and homelessness in 15 different ways, literally. And so depending which program you're using. So I think we want to get past the words right now and try to talk about what we mean. And that's going to help us a bit. And as a spoiler alert, so they did the technical advisory, asked this question where we rated ourselves. And I don't expect everybody to put their opinions on audio right now. But I don't know if you would like to know that answer or if you would like to wait and do your own assessment and then come back with the answer. We're like super curious as staff, if the staff's answers are in alignment with the elected and appointed officials. And but we might not know that answer until weeks or months down the road. So Mayor wants me to tell you guys. Do you want me to tell you guys?
So how are you planning to collect this? I'm sorry. Are you wanting to collect this as part of the analysis of the current?
This is just informal. This is just informal. So, yeah, yeah,
Go ahead, Nicole, why don't you
yeah.
break the news?
Well, I think to Mayor's point, is I would say we hovered around the C category. I don't know if that's accurate, Peter and team. We kind of vacillated between A and D depending on the topic, you know, so flood protection as an example versus just in general. And so we had ended up with some interesting discussion, say, between, we had a Fargo school district staff person and, you know, Nathan Borboom as they kind of talked through that, our staff. But I think, I'll quote Ben Dow if he doesn't mind. You know, I think staff all aspires to be A, and with reality, we're probably a C as we base on our, you know, kind of needs, resources, asks. So that, I don't know if that's a fair summary, Kim, Mark, or team, what you heard.
Well, as a community, when you spend $3 billion on priority number one, it's tough to, you know, get to priority 5, right?
Right.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to share, even if you don't want to sort of put a letter grade on it? You know, any thoughts about what Fargo has been getting right or wrong, you know, in the last decade or so when it comes to some of that smart growth language?
I think your statistics showed, when you looked at the land that was annexed and how little has been annexed in the last, from 2010 to 20, to me, that shows that we were smart in not, I think I can only think of one industrial project that leapfrogged out on 29. I think we've been doing, I gave us a B, because I think we've been infilling, I think, the last 5 years, the projects that have come before the Planning Commission on all the infills. I think you couldn't have been any, I think it's been very smart growth. I don't think the developers are jumping to, at least on the south end of town, right away to jump 76th. It's coming. I mean, you got the, you know, in the school district buys land south of 76th. I think we've been doing a great job at infill in the areas that have been annexed. And I mean, I would assume in the next 10 years that we probably will be looking at some growth to the south. I mean, again, this is developer-driven and it's market-driven. And if you're not growing, you're dying. And I think I think Fargo's done a good job. I think we've been blessed in a way that we have not had the national companies come into town. We've had our local building, 3 or 4 of our largest, you know, local builders have done a good job trying to keep some stuff affordable. And I think it's going to be fun to see what Fargo does with the land down to the diversion that we've worked for a heck of a long time to get completed, or get, now it's being worked on anyway. We know it's coming. And the things that the city of Fargo has done, whether we be becoming a wastewater area for the community, we're serving water to the community, to the surrounding communities. I think that's just smart things that the city has done, and I don't want to give you a C, I'd give you at least a B minus then.
You know, I think one of the perspectives on this too, if you think about 15 years ago and you look around the country and what happened 15 years ago, that every growing community had a huge housing bust, and cities went bankrupt, people went, you know, mortgages went underwater. They're still recovering from that. Fargo, I mean, we had those same situations they all did, and we were resilient through it, you know, and so, I mean, you look at how we managed that, and we managed through COVID, which had a lot of downturns in a lot of cities, and ours have been pretty steady and consistent. There's no peaks or valleys in our sort of growth rate. There's no booms and busts. That's tough to do over a long period of time. And I think there's obviously probably a lot of reasons for that. But when you look back at how other cities around the country, if you ask them how the last 15 years have been, I bet there's a lot of tough times to manage. And so I think we gotta look at that. And I've gone over an hour now before I've mentioned bicycling, but I like to ride bike. And I think one of the things we've done well because of flood protections and buyouts is we've been able to leverage those into some cool bike paths and connecting neighborhoods, because my big pet peeve is when there's a neighborhood that isn't connected to the rest of the city. I think it kind of separates them. And so I think we've done a good job with that as new developments have come in. But one of the things I think we get caught up sometimes in good ideas and we try to implement them everywhere, or the buzzwords. I live in North Fargo in the core neighborhood, but I haven't ever once biked on University or 10th Street, where we have a bike lane that nobody wants to bike on those roads. And so sometimes we get so caught up in what we think is a good idea and try to implement them everywhere, and we do it wrong, in my opinion. And so we try these smart growths and so ideas, but we need to make sure we're doing them in the right places too.
Was there a slide that had the principles of smart growth? Did you have a slide that kind of, no? Yeah, I think, perhaps a common understanding of what we're meaning by smart growth would be good. But, I guess in my mind, it depends on if you're talking what area of the city. I would, give the core probably an A, but when you look at everything else, I would give it a D. And it's relating probably more to what I understand smart growth to be. So it might be different than some of these others around the table here, but our neighborhoods are not walkable. We don't have, well, and when you looked at the number of people per acre, we have really hit bottom. So density isn't happening out there. And so, there's a lot of aspects of smart growth that we're not applying and probably could do a lot better.
When you say that core neighborhoods aren't walkable, when you say the core neighborhoods aren't walkable, are you suggesting it's more of an infrastructure issue, a lack thereof, or it's there's nothing to walk to? What does not walkable mean?
They're more walkable, probably. I apologize, it echoes so much in here. I'm having a hard time understanding you. They're more walkable, but certainly, access to services, whether that be grocery stores or whatever, is not good.
So it's being able to get to what you want. That's a bigger issue than maybe the sidewalk not existing, for example. Okay, thanks.
Well, John here disagrees with me, but one of the things I bring up are these developments where you drive in and all of the buildings look alike. They all have the garage doors in front. A lot of them are the same color. Can't really differentiate one from another. There is no place to walk. You drive in and you drive out. And I remember someone saying the garage doors close approximately the same time and they open at the same time in the morning, and people are driving in and out of those communities. But there is nothing to do there. And you have to drive everywhere, whether it's to a commercial zone or if you're going to do anything, even to get to a park, you basically have to drive to get there. So that's the kind of growth that I don't like. He doesn't agree with me. He thinks all growth is good. But, okay, I'm just teasing.
I'm going to say something. Walkability in this community, I think we get it mixed up. Again, I've lived in my neighborhood, and I'm in a core neighborhood, right next to a school. But if I decide I'm going to go to Lindenwood, which is 3 blocks away, I would probably either ride my bike or, depending upon what we're going to do, keep in mind in this community, we're walkable 6 months out of the year, and the other 6 months you're driving your vehicle because you're either in the late fall And nobody walks to the grocery store. You're not going to carry home 2 gallons of milk. You're going to take your car. And we've got grocery stores in most of the neighborhoods. I mean, I think a good example of a core neighborhood could be North Fargo up around Northport, where even I did a lot of remodeling in Northport over the years, and the north side people didn't even support the the businesses that were there. Hornbacher's has been the only one that's really been successful there. But I mean, my point is, I think walkable, I get a little tired of that term because that's only applicable a few months out of half the year, and the other half, we're in a community, whether we all grew up rural, I grew up in Fargo, so I think walkability means different things in different parts of the country. We're used to driving. We are an area of town where we are, I think, obsessed with our vehicles. And people drive to the grocery store. You're not going to walk to the grocery store unless you're going to take a shopping cart with you and drag your stuff home. I mean, I'm only 5 or 6 blocks from Hornbacher's on University Drive, but I sure not going to walk and carry a grocery bag home.
No, I think you live in one of the best neighborhoods, and it's a core neighborhood. And that's different from what I was talking about compared to the new developments in South Fargo that really are insulated by accessibility even into the neighborhood itself. You know, I drive in there and I get lost in these mazes. You can maybe get out on one end and out on the other, but there's nothing in the core or the center of that neighborhood that would attract anyone other than those living there. And that's kind of what I'm referring to.
But I mean, that's the point. It's still market driven. Those people have chose to live in those neighborhoods. And you're saying what you want to imply is they're living a substandard life because they didn't have all these things. And that's, I mean, I think that's the balancing act. You know, I mean, I think the other thing out of the growth plan it's going to be interesting to see what you come up with is, have we, with the mixed use that's been built in the last 10 years, a good share of it's sitting empty right now. I mean, have we reached, do you reach a saturation with mixed use? And with the amount of office space that's sitting empty, you know, we've got a lot of mixed use on main floor. The project that we just approved on the South Plaza is really a smart one because that's replacing, again, that's a replacement project. But it's also bringing in density. And the other thing that we fight in Fargo is we're upside down on the national average on the number of housing units we have compared to apartment units. I think the national average is somewhere in 60% to 40% apartments, and we're kind of upside down in Fargo with that number. So we need more housing. I mean, we haven't been meeting the housing needs that we have in this town.
All I'm saying is that.
If I could interrupt real quick. I didn't know how much more you had in your, are we kind of at the end? So I just want to let everybody, we're kind of at the end.
We're worried you won't get done.
Yeah, I was watching the clock a little bit, and I also wanted to make sure, you know, Tommy and Jennifer from our planning commissioner or anyone else that wanted to have some conversation. I see this is fantastic dialogue, and I don't want to cut that down. And I see some work sessions in the future about walkability and some other, you know, more tactical, specific things. I appreciate the need to get into the specificity to know what we're exactly talking about. We joke as a profession, we've been talking about the term walkability for 25 years, and we kind of joke like, hasn't it been solved yet? And we know it hasn't really because everybody has a different mindset. So we want to get into that as we proceed to make sure, because we're going to need to know this, you know, spoiler alert, we're going to need to know this as we get into the land development code rewriting for sure. Yeah. And so we don't want to be vague as we get into the land development code. The developers don't want that, the staff don't want that, the community doesn't want that. They want more detail. And so I'll just pause for a minute to see if Jennifer or Tommy or anyone else, John, Denise, anybody else have any comments they want to say?
Sure. I just had a comment on the density per acre that I thought was really shocking. I think it was the 4.9 units per acre. Was that what it was? Or whatever it was, quite a bit lower than what it used to be historically. And I guess my question kind of relates to the financial modeling and if there will be any sort of financial modeling in the growth plan. And just running through scenarios of, if we stick with a 4.9 throughout the full build of the rest of the developable land in Fargo, is that even enough tax base to support the infrastructure and, the roads and all that infrastructure? Those are liabilities for the cities that they have to upkeep for forever. So, when those get replaced, do we just not have enough people out there for the amount of things that are out there to replace it without, being financially insolvent? So I guess, does the growth plan include those kind of scenarios where, here's a 10 units per acre versus a 20, and how does that look financially for the city? And because smart growth does not mean you keep growing, and that's, if you're not growing, you're dying. But if you're growing, but you can't support it, you can't sustain that growth, then, that's the opposite of smart.
Mm-hmm. No, those are good questions. So to answer your question, the first one is, yes, Strategic Economics, our partner, is looking at the financial modeling for that density per acre, how that growth impacts your tax base. And so we're looking at that as well. And then our intent is to follow that up with kind of some scenario planning. What would it look like if you maintained a current pattern? Or maybe the alternative is you pivot slightly, or maybe it's a major course correction. Those are scenarios that we do want to coordinate with you, look at, and actually kind of lay out the land use and give you what those numbers might look like. So yeah, we are doing that.
And then I guess this isn't directly related to that, but one thing I did notice just looking at the charts and the figures, those are all great. I think it would be really beneficial for the general public if there was some sort of visual with that, right? So like, I don't know if a growth plan does that or a comprehensive plan does that, or if that's the land development code does that, but what does a block look like when it's at 4.9 units per acre? What does it look like at 6, 8, 10, all the way up, just so people can visualize? And, maybe they're thinking, 4 units an acre, like, that's a good number for me, but, what does that look like? And maybe they get upset thinking of 8, but, look, it's really only 2 extra townhomes in your block. And it's like, okay, I can stomach that. So I think those kind of visuals will really help the general public just understand what they're reading.
Yeah, we will start to kind of lay out what that land use looks like, kind of block by block, and also area. Also, we'll start to kind of think about what that looks like in terms of additional parks and open space. They decrease density, but we have started to dig a little bit into the actual types of uses in the annexation area. A little bit low on parks and rec, for example, a little bit low on school land, et cetera. That could decrease density actually further by getting that out there. So how does that density relate to those kinds of parks and spaces? So you really want to, at that point, look at it from a smaller district perspective, not all, 7,000 acres that were in the post-2000 annexation. So we'll hone in on some of that specificity in terms of blocks and kind of district typology. Yeah.
I have a question. So the reality is Fargo is part of a larger metro as well, in the middle of a larger metro. So how will you be factoring the amenities of the other surrounding communities?
You said the amenities?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are certainly aware that we have to take a look at what West Fargo is doing, what their impacts in their ETJ might be, certainly Horace, et cetera. So we will start to look at that and kind of map where different, maybe it's different amenities or different kind of institutions, whether that's, parks or schools, et cetera. We will be looking at all of that and kind of looking at it in terms of maybe a radius, because you could be, certainly you could be in West Fargo or down in Horace, and you benefit by being in a radius very near Fargo, obviously, or West Fargo in that case. So we'll look at that as well. Yeah.
a term that constantly spins me is housing and affordable housing. I can sometimes get many, many, many minutes into a conversation and then realize the people I'm talking to are talking apartments and I'm talking housing, and they're not the same world. You know, John Gunkelman alluded to this turning upside down of our paradigm, but about 1989 or 90, we had 60% single-family home ownership. Now we've flipped it. Now we have almost that many in apartments. And I guess my thoughts are, what do we want? And how are we going to get there? And I'm not sure we're all in agreement that owning a home is what people want and aspire to. That's a question. This density topic I'm seeing in lots of communities that I see talking about it, and like in the Twin Cities, they're taking away single-family zoning to increase density. They're adding accessory dwelling units to increase density. They're reducing parking requirements to increase density. These are topics that are really relevant in my mind. You know, I don't know that we're really vetting them. And I'll say one last thing. This is just me now. But we have another unspoken dynamic where in the 70s, when they established the boundaries, a chunk of our undeveloped land was in the West Fargo School District. So now we have the West Fargo School District superseding the Fargo School District in growth. It's Fargo's growth, generally. That is the West Fargo School District's growth. So this is a dynamic we don't talk about. What are the implications of having a chunk of our city in a whole nother school district? And what's the future we'd want? And what would be best for the greater community? I think that topic needs to be looked at some point, you know, and not just work around it as if it'll never be talked about. We've combined our chambers of commerce. You know, I think the day will come, we'll be discussing combining our school districts into a world, but that conversation needs to happen is when we're talking growth into the future.
If I can say something here from the back row seat. Sorry about this, but I can understand and hear much better from back here. You know, we've been focusing quite a bit on the smart growth, but a comment earlier, John, you made in regards to if a community isn't growing, it's dying. And even that concept of growth, are we headed into an era when that growth is going to slow down or, heaven forbid, even get worse? We're seeing NDSU contracting in its enrollment. That population tree is catching up to the elder population. So, you know, that whole issue of growth, what does it mean to us? Is it geography growth where we're annexing more land, or is it population growth? Is it wealth growth, or something else? So I still don't know for sure if we're all talking about the same thing there and what's realistic for the next, I say 4 decades. I mean, I hope that we're looking out more than just the next 5 to 10 years.
It's been a great discussion, but one of the things I think about is, and John and I argue about apartments versus single-family homes. Apartment vacancies are right now 2%. We could need more apartments. South Fargo, next to Davies High School, they're going to put an apartment complex in, and the neighborhood came in and said, no, we don't want that because the Davies pool's full. Our kids, there's too many kids in the pool, so we don't want more density, we want less density. I disagree with Arlette. If you live in the neighborhood in the south, you love your neighborhood just as much as you guys love your neighborhood, you know, where you live, because we're used to it. Fox Run, the garage door is open on Sunday and everybody grills outside in front of their garage and it's a neighborhood feel. That's how they do it. They've grown to get used to that. And although it looks like, oh, we got all these garages, it's actually a neighborhood that interacts and does stuff. And when I look at all the different neighborhoods in the south side, each has a little different character, but people actually live there because they love it. I think one of the growth plans we want is, what is changing? Do people want single-family homes, or do they want apartments with pools and different things that the apartments have now? Do the young kids not necessarily want to live in a home with a yard that you have to mow? And John, I disagree. I got a puppy this year, so I changed my whole life on walkable, because I walk all year long now. And I realize how many people don't. I mean, how many dogs are let out and come back, but they don't go and walk the neighborhood. So my neighborhood is walkable. I go out and walk my dog, bump into all sorts of other people. Now I'm getting community feel, because now you have a dog, you're this, blah, blah, blah. But I think for a lot of us in the south side, each neighborhood has its own character, and you kind of move in that neighborhood because you kind of want to move in that neighborhood. We'd get lousy scores sometimes. We might be told, hey, this isn't the right kind of neighborhood. You wouldn't want that. But I see in some of the planning we've seen for south of 52nd, a lot of walkable, a lot of stuff. But John makes a good point. You're not going to walk over to the grocery store and bring all the groceries back. You're going to drive. And I think what I see in some of the development we see on veterans, it reaffirms the fact that some people just like to drive their car. I mean, you have all these little shops all the way along there, which we said would fail, and it's working. People like that kind of feel. And veterans, to me, is you should look at that, because somehow that's working. Now I see them try to duplicate it in other places, and they look like they're going to fail, because they've got too much of that, where you don't have enough little shop owners to go in those slots. And downtown's been successful in working. But I think what part of us want is, what is the reflection of what the new generation wants in their sites that we grow? Because we have limited space we can grow into. And you're right, it's, do I want 8 per acre? Is that too much density? Do I want 6 per acre? How many do I want per acre around me as I grow? If I go to other huge metro areas, right, it's huge apartments. If I go to New York City, I feel people on the street all the time, right? I mean, it's just packed. You feel that constant vibration. But that's kind of what we're looking at as a metro area. What do you really want? What does the people of Fargo want? And we've had great growth. We've gone, and Rocky is right, somehow we've gone through a lot of different times. Our housing market right now, we're building half the single-family homes we did last year. We're literally in half. So yes, it is hit. We've started to hit some of that because of mortgage rates or whatever. I think we're going to have a slow period here for a while. Nicole, the reason I would go to a B is you guys are probably too much in the trenches in the planning department, but because I have the belief we're ahead of it a little bit here, that we've got a consultant coming in, us helping us. And when you put up there all the studies we've had since 2012, this city continually works and wonders and tries to figure out what it's doing. But I think we're a B because we're ahead of the game, because we are looking forward. We didn't just, we're not looking to hire you now. We hired you, and you are here doing your work. But I think that's what we're, as a city, are very thoughtful, is we need to figure out what would be, quote, the smart growth. And I don't know where smart growth came internally, came in our planning department or something, but Arlette makes a good thing, is that how do you define smart growth? What does that mean? It probably means something different to planners, I hate to say, but we'll all have a little different ideas of what that is. But I'm a little curious, because I think the housing study is going to come out. We need more apartments in all neighborhoods, in West Fargo and Horace, all over the place. I think it's also going to come out. We need to have single-family homes and fill that niche as well. But if you put me in an apartment downtown, I wouldn't survive. It just seems too closed in for me. But people are living in there. They're living in there for $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month. I mean, they'll pay the money. So to your point, affordable, I'm not quite sure what's affordable now. Because John Strand and I talk about $500 a month, but I don't think that exists out there unless it's an older apartment. But you're in much higher rents than we've ever seen. But yet people will move into the community and say, hey, this is great. This is cheaper than where I lived, right? So. So I think the challenge is there, but Nicole, I'd still go B.
Well, I know we're at 1 o'clock here. Great discussion. This has been helpful. And just to give you a preview of our next steps here, we have an open house tonight in the Sky Commons second floor, and then a month-long online open house at fargogrowthplan.org. We'll have additional findings coming together that we'll be providing, kind of summarizing for you during July. We'll be distributing a draft vision for growth in late July as well, to begin to get some comments and feedback from the vision that we're seeing from the conversations we've been having. And then our next visit as a team will be in late August. And that'll really be the conclusion of phase 1, and we'll be in full-fledged phase 2 at that point. So thank you again for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.
We're